everyone. This is Holly on a Tuesday, and I just completely ran out of time yesterday before I remembered to submit a video for you guys, but hopefully we'll get to sort of disseminate the restorative behavioral programs that we've been working on with MTSS really soon too. This week, I really wanted to draw a tie between the role of anger in the reparative process and the restorative process itself. So tying it into maybe that first R of the restorative process, which is respect, which is also one of the key values that you guys have as a school. One of the things that I think is a misnomer about restorative discipline is that there isn't a place for emotions or a place for accountability, a place for kind of like owning that process. And I want to dispel that because in restorative discipline, the accountable part is that one must have integrity around what they did wrong and actually seek restoration and repair with the person whom they wronged. And a lot of times when we think as educators about our roles as reparative discipline leaders, then we think that there is a lack of accountability between us and them. We also think that that means that we sort of have to be, I'm projecting here, but many people who get engaged in the restorative discipline process think, well, where is the room for what my experience is? Where's the room for anger or frustration or accountability between the teacher and the student? And I want to honor that we are human, we are imperfect, and we are going to have emotions. And the one I want to focus in on, as I said, is anger. Anger in psychology speak is a legitimate emotion for sure and is a catalyzing emotion. But it's often also a secondary emotion, which means it comes out of a different emotion that's been suppressed. So I want to make the relationship as a mother between the two emotions, fear and anger. One time my youngest son was on the front porch, buck naked. He was probably 2 or 3. And he got into something that someone had left on our porch. He was doing some work at our house, and it was a cleaning solution that had poison in it. I did not know it had been diluted with water, but my youngest son took it and started slurping it out of the pump. And I saw this, and I couldn't find my words. And instead of finding the words and reacting calmly and saying, Evan, I need you to put that down, or instead of walking over and taking it away, I reacted angrily. And I was like, Evan, you need to put that down now. And he got scared. He dropped it. He started crying. And I then checked in with my body and felt the real feeling of fear. And I started crying. And what I'm making the relationship is that anger comes out of a feeling of not being able to control a situation, and it is often a symptom of us feeling that vulnerability of not being in control and not being able to know the outcome. It's also a symptom of us getting triggered by stuff that we haven't processed, haven't worked through, old wounds that may have been from our own childhood, like when a student yells at us, it can trigger that person in us, that little person in us who didn't like being yelled at. So anger is, I want to be really clear, anger is a legitimate emotion. We feel it. We often react out of it in a negative way. But what I want to say about it is that it too is an emotion like anything. We go through something like 86 or more emotions a day, and can even be like 40 in an hour, depending on what we're up to. So emotions, they come, they rise, and they fall away. They rise, and they fall away. All things rise and fall away. And when we can attend to our emotions in this way, where we watch them and observe them and notice them like leaves floating down a river. What we can do is we can sort of stand with them and say to the emotion, what do you have to teach me? And with anger, it so often has to teach us something deeper about ourselves than just the anger itself. So that's the first thing. Anger is a secondary emotion. The second thing is we're going to mess up and we're going to say things sometimes out of frustration that may come off as unkind or mean or disrespectful, not just to students, but to colleagues as well. Or we might do something, many of us, when we feel angry, we shut down. We don't say anything, we become passive, which is its own kind of anger. I call that kind of the quiet fire, the quietly burning fire. And then it comes out later. It simmers, and then blows up like a boiling pot. So we have been taught in our culture, and I would say specifically women have been taught in our culture not to express, feel, or act upon our anger, lest we be considered too strong. But I think there's a really healthy way to be angry, which is to express it in a way that doesn't do damage to you or to the receiver. If it does damage to us when we repress it and keep it in, it does damage to the receiver when we react and act with violence or act with words that we are going to regret. But it's going to happen. So the invitation here is not that in restorative discipline you can't ever feel anger. It's to work on showing our students how to hold and express that anger healthfully. So when you find yourself in a contentious moment with a staff or with a student or with anyone in your life really, it's noticing where that anger sits. So for me, it's like that deep flush all through my body that I can feel that is a really big signal that I am angry. I also, because I fear conflict, tend to get quiet. So what I've had to learn how to do is to say, I can feel myself getting really angry right now or really frustrated, whatever word works for you. And I need some space and I need to walk away. I'll come back to this when I'm ready. You can say that to a kid. If a kid is pushing your buttons and it is just too much, you have every right to say, I say it to my sons all the time. Guys, I can't deal with this right now. I'm too frustrated. We'll talk about it in 5 minutes. Let's both take a deep breath. So I think with our students, we can model that. We can model what is it like to feel and express anger in a way that does no harm. That's the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. So when we can transform our anger in that way by saying, I feel myself getting really frustrated. I know there's a solution to this problem, but we need to come back to it either later today or tomorrow. And make a plan with that kid so that they don't walk away feeling anxious, like they've done something wrong and they're about to get in really big trouble and they may be carrying that anxiety with them. But it's to say, I can't do this right now. We need to come back to this tomorrow. And I guarantee that both parties will be able to come back to it with a clearer head, with a better intention, and with just more words that make sense. So there is a place for anger in restorative discipline. What the invitation is just to acknowledge it, to acknowledge that it's there, to model how to handle it and express it in a way that does not harm either party, and to walk away when you need to, and then always make a plan to come back to it. I have read as a psychologist, of course there's a large spectrum of what is healthy to what is unhealthy in family dynamics. But we're talking about this sort of like acceptable middle where of course parents are going to get angry. Of course parents are going to get really frustrated and say sometimes things that we wish we wouldn't say to our children. And of course we also want to love our children and be in that loving, fun, playful space with them. So I'm not talking about severe abuse all the way to deep love. I'm talking about that middle that's we say regretful things, we sometimes do regretful things, but we still love our children very, very much. I'm not talking about the dysfunction. But when we are in that space where we have messed up and we can't need to come back to it, it is 100% acceptable with our own children, with our students, to come back and say, I messed up. I am really sorry. with the way that I responded to your behavior yesterday. I wish I had done that differently. Restoration is also a kind of replay. So think of like instant replay on football games, and now we have it in baseball. And, so we can instantly replay that moment and say, I would like to go back and I'd like to try this again. Would you be willing to do that with me? And if the student says, no, I'm not ready, we need to honor that, because that's them owning their emotion. But we can ask them, okay, can I check back in with you either at the end of the day or tomorrow and see if we could be ready? That's restoration. And what I was going to say is that what I've learned about kids and families is that it's not so much that like witnessing conflict or fights, arguments within the family is negative. A lot of people say, well, we don't fight in front of the kids, or we don't ever fight, we don't ever yell. I don't want the kids to see it. It's not bad for kids to see conflict modeled healthfully in the ways that I'm talking about. To even see a back and forth, an argument, and to keep honoring that space where the argument is until it becomes a solution, until it becomes a resolution. It's actually really good for kids to see conflict modeled healthfully that gets resolved. Because then they too can check in and say, oh, so my anger is okay. It's just about how I express it and how I sort of deal with it. And when we can model healthy conflict, and that looks like using a lot of I statements. I feel really frustrated when blah, blah, blah. I feel really unheard when you're looking at your phone when we're in the middle of a conversation, right? So the more we can say I statements and in the midst of conflict and not resort to name calling, bullying, or walking away out of anger, the more we can just be very present to what's going on in our bodies and in our own selves, then the more possibility there is for resolutions. So the same is true for our students. When they see us modeling conflict in a healthy way, taking a minute, taking a breather, but always being willing to come back to it, that's a pathway that we're rewiring in their brain. We're helping them find a new way to do anger. So anger is, and this feels like big on the national scale even. There's so much uncertainty on the national scale right now, whether that has to do with where you fall politically or how you feel about how COVID and the response to it is going, how you feel about the racial tension that's going on in the world. There's a lot of anger being expressed in ways that feels overwhelming. And I think the invitation for us as people is to touch the place in us that feels angry or uncomfortable or unsure, and to sit with that and to get to the emotion beneath the anger. For me, that has been grief. It has been a real sense of grief that my kids aren't in school the way that I would like for them to be. It's a real sense of grief that white supremacy still rears its ugly head in ways that is incredibly harmful to Black and brown bodies. So the activating force is anger. It lets me know something is up. The underlying thing is just a deep sense of grief that these things are still present. So I want to encourage y'all in your interactions with students to hold their anger with them, to mirror it back to them and say, I see that you're really frustrated. Do you want to tell me more about that? And not try to fix it and not try to come up with a solution, just hold space for it, which is really hard. And I'd love to, practice that with you guys, or have y'all practice that with each other. How can we hold space for anger? I hope that's helpful, a helpful way to sort of think about anger as an activating force and as a cue to the underlying emotions, and that the goal is to express the anger without doing harm, which means you can walk away and come back to it when you need to. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and hopefully I will get to engage with y'all on Fridays. Bye.